family history of psychosis, and it's about 10%, which, that's a lot of people to put at risk, So you don't want to discount people just because they have a family history. The other point is that actually it's not just those with a family history, and that's clear now from the scientific data, that actually one of the genes that confers risk for cannabis-induced psychosis does so in people without any family history. Let's see, the final point refuting this sort of argument of correlation doesn't equal causation is that a lot of people who first experience marijuana-induced psychosis will try to quit because it's really a very unpleasant symptom. And we fortunately will hear, I believe, from Scott Chipman. He has some entertainers who have been on public record speaking to the fact that, they had to quit. Shall I name some of them? Okay, Seth MacFarlane, the Family Guy creator, I believe, John Cusack, Howard Stern, the shock jock. And so basically, there are quite a few famous people who have gone on record saying, yeah, I couldn't do it. I had to quit because the paranoia was too bad for me. You will hear scientists say very often, and I'm dismayed that more of my colleagues are not up on this podium speaking out. In Europe, you have many more health professionals who are willing to speak about the harms of marijuana use. There are too few in this country, and again, I think it's a little bit of the American arrogance. If the science isn't done here, it's not considered to be as worthwhile or as serious a scientific pursuit. And a lot of this work has been done in Europe. So I wish that more of my colleagues were speaking out. I think that as marijuana use becomes more prevalent, more of them will. Right up there with psychosis is the increased risk for suicide. And the risk has increased as the product has become more concentrated. More recent studies place the risk at about 7-fold of that of someone who does not use recreational drugs, even after a prior history of depression is corrected for. So even if you take out somebody who was moody and then began using marijuana, that increased risk for suicide is still there. And there is something very peculiar going on with marijuana edibles, as recently described by New York Times columnist Maureen Dowd, who ate too much of a brownie or a gummy bear or something. And she was pretty sure that either the world was ending or that she was dead already. Part of this is because when you smoke marijuana, you bypass what is called first-pass metabolism. The liver doesn't get a chance to do its thing. And what the liver does with THC is produce something known as 11-hydroxy-THC, which actually is more potent than delta-9 THC. And it is thought that perhaps this has something to do with why edibles can be so much more serious in terms of their effect on a certain subset of people who ingest. Very often, they're the naive users, but not always. I think that the clearest examples, were mentioned earlier by Jim Gerhardt, Luke Goodman, happy-go-lucky college kid or college graduate skiing in Colorado, decided he'd just give the edibles a try, and he became just overwhelmed with this impending sense of doom, this world-ending sort of feeling that seemed to be a common theme in these people who've had these experiences in Colorado, and he immediately committed suicide, just completely out of the blue without having any history of depression. He was from Oklahoma, and he had just gone to Colorado for a ski vacation with his cousin. There are more minor effects, anxiety, depression, and panic. Those are often preludes to the more serious effects, mental health effects that come later. If you ever doubt, some of these scientific papers, one of the great resources to really sort of plant your feet on the ground and experience understand what is happening to the average teenage or early 20-something user is to go to some of the marijuana chat rooms. And I mean, it can actually be really sad because you read these testimonies from somebody who's 18 years old, and you'll say, I've been using for about 7 months. I started off using maybe once a week, and I was doing okay, but all of a sudden now, I had this feeling that my grandmother was going to stab me to death in the middle of the night when I was staying at her house, and I had to run out in the cold, and that's how she called the police and they had to come get me. And so what am I doing wrong? And you'll hear testimony after testimony, these kids who are pleading for help, and sometimes the response that comes back in these chat rooms is, oh well, you're just scared about being arrested, don't worry, chill out, you've got to find a better place to smoke, better strain, whatever. But every now and then there's a real wise guy who's been using a lot of drugs, I guess, for a while, and they'll say, you better quit pot, because my experience was, I just never got over it, and I switched to LSD, and it was better. So the things you learn in chat rooms can be really amazing, and in terms of being a scientist and reading all these statistics and everything, to actually hear those voices of the kids, is really humbling in a way. So at this point, I'd like to say, it doesn't matter much if what legalization will accomplish is that the usage will decrease. I mean, that's a theory of the legalizers, that they'll be able to regulate it so well that the teen use will go down. And adult use, maybe. I don't know if that's their thought or not. You wouldn't think so. And in fact, that certainly can't be the goal of the many companies now that are sprouting up in Colorado, Oregon, Washington State, Alaska. In Colorado, you heard from Jim Gerhardt, that and Ben Court, that use has gone up in pretty much every age group. Colorado leads the nation in those aged 12 to 17, and after legalization, the use in that age group jumped significantly. Well, not actually statistically significantly, but it's certainly trending in the wrong direction. 18 and older went up by 46%. And so then they came out, that was federal data. The next study that was done was a Healthy Kids Colorado survey conducted by the health department. And unfortunately, this study was much touted in the media as showing that there was no change in marijuana use after legalization. What they neglected to tell you that was within the data, there were some really important considerations. First of all, they missed out on one of the largest school districts in the state of Colorado. Jefferson County opted out of the study, so it wasn't really a comprehensive study. But in addition, the net zero change was actually because there were some areas that skyrocketed and other areas where they actually had a decrease. So what was going on there? Well, the areas that skyrocketed were areas that had a lot of dispensaries. They were the liberal areas, the central Colorado ski towns. Use by high school seniors went up 90% after legalization. In Boulder, Colorado, again, a very liberal area, tons of dispensaries. Use went up a little bit less, 50%, but that was because they were already so high. High school seniors in Boulder, according to the Colorado Department of Health's own study, 42% use regularly. Now, if I was the head of the Colorado Department of Health, I would declare that a public health emergency. So I'm puzzled when I look at this Healthy Kids Colorado survey, and I think, this is a health department. They're tracking something that they should be taking seriously. If this was something like tuberculosis that they were tracking, and they saw a 50% jump in cases in one particular area, and maybe there was a decrease over on the western slope. Do you think they would ignore that 50% increase? I mean, to me, this shows you they're treating marijuana as if it is not a public health problem. And these are health professionals within the very state. There's something very wrong with either their ethics or their training. And I want to just address the age of risk a little bit. You know, Proposition 64 will keep the use, marijuana supposedly away from those under the age of 21, but those 21 and older will be able to use. And you've heard earlier, the brain is continuing to develop to 25. Actually, the most recent data shows it's probably as late as 28 to 30. And certainly that's a window of time that encompasses also the age of risk for schizophrenia. So I would believe, that age is still very much at risk for schizophrenia. As happened to a cousin of mine. This was back when marijuana was much less potent. He was a brilliant musician, a very accomplished player of the trumpet. He had a position with the Adelaide Symphony Orchestra in Australia. He had immigrated down there using the low-strength marijuana common in the late 60s, early 70s, past the peak age of risk for schizophrenia. So he's about 28, 29. He began smoking pot heavily and developed florid psychotic symptoms, was running around the square naked, stuff like that, thinking it was Jesus. Of course he lost his job. Of course he lost his marriage. And he had been, essentially an individual with schizophrenia for the remainder of his adult life. He's now approaching old age. And, this was a real tragedy because he is a lovely person, but he had such potential that was totally lost.